Do you have a child that is gender confused? Are you the parent of somebody that is either identified as transgender using different pronouns or some other type of gender confused, just propaganda that's being shoved down your kids' throats? Well, I created the Biblically Parenting Gender Confused Children support group for parents just like you. This support group is completely free. We meet monthly, and you are able to connect with other like minded Christian parents that are struggling with how to parent children that are gender confused. They're getting all sorts of nonsense brought to them by the world, and I want to help connect parents that are going through similar struggles and be able to tackle this issue through a biblical worldview. If you are interested in joining this group or know somebody that might be interested in this group, head on over to faithfullyengaged.com and there's more information about the support group there. I have a link down in the description below. Well, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Faithfully Engaged. Today, I'm really excited to have my guest on today. His name is Jason Perry, and Jason has all sorts of wonderful stories here, from being a Navy SEAL, a cop, paramedic, and now a pastor. So I'm really looking forward to digging more into Jason and what all he's doing with his life right now. So, Jason, it's great to have you on. Why don't you tell the guest or the listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, so I was an atheist for 37 years. That's the first one. And then, during the beginning of, I don't know if you want to cover my testimony or what you want to cover today, but throughout that journey, I went from godless to, carnal Christian to church shopping to horrified by not being able to find a masculine pastor anywhere in the continental U.S. I'm exaggerating, but, just trying to find a pastor who actually had a scar or a callus was pretty rough. And then, found one and got, and it's been off and running since then. So I got a ministry, a church farm and ministry down here in Johnson City, Tennessee, 44-acre farm with cows, hogs, chickens, our, home church, garage church, whatever you want to call it. And it's our discipling ground. We have a gym, we have a shooting range, and the farm is where we do all the discipling, that in the gym and everything else, so it's real easy to act all squared away and pretend for on Sunday for 90 minutes, 60 to 90 minutes. But when it's cold and wet or hot and miserable around big animals, people show you who they are. they show you, like yesterday, we had 6 300-pound hogs get out, and it was me and my wife trying to convince them to go where they didn't want to go.
Yeah, I'm sure you see all sorts of real life, like you're saying, in that scenario.
Yeah, it's a blast. I recommend it to everyone.
Great. Well, let's start kind of what you started with there, of going from atheist to pastor. I mean, that's a pretty big jump there. Just give us a little bit more detail on your conversion experience and how that all went down.
Yeah, so my story actually starts with my grandfather. My grandfather was an orphan in a notorious Catholic orphanage in Newfoundland, and there's a movie made on it called The Boys of St. Vincent's. So he was sexually abused there, which hardened his heart to the faith. So my family was raised without faith as atheists or God hostile, church hostile. And it had a devastating family. I'm the first to break the curse of that. I've got my mom since. Great testimony in itself. But, for 37 years, I was the enemy of God. And for a lot of that time, I would, we're born empty vessels, right? So you're either going to be filled with the Holy Spirit or you're going to be filled with the world or the enemy. And I was 100% filled with the world and the enemy. So, I acquired an abandonment wound at a young age. My mom had when she was 16. Dad was 18. Didn't last long. Got passed around the family. No one really fought for me. That's what every person, every kid, everyone in this world wants, somebody who's going to fight for them, right? And when you don't have anyone this appears like that's going to fight for you, it appears like you're not worth fighting for, right? So what do? You go out. John Eldredge writes a lot about this. You acquire the father wound, and then you put your first faith in your first girlfriend. You think that's going to be forever. It doesn't work out. And then for me, I went from the wounded to the serial wounder. So I was like, okay, I just had my heart broken. I'm never, ever, 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 ever going to trust again. I'm going to be the cheater. I'm going to be the guy who does all that. And then, so I tried to fix it with conquest with women. They'll fight for me, all that. And that was very true. But all men betray, and God has put breadcrumbs. You don't see them when you're walking along, but you look back and you're like, man, there's all these breadcrumbs leading me to him. And he put believers in my life at key points where it started the sanctification process. It started the, whatever you want to call it, the quickening, whatever you want to call it, depending if you're a Calvinist or an Arminian or whatever, started the process of, I started meeting these men who had peace that I didn't have, because what my power is because I was wounded, because I was incomplete, I acquired the superpower of anger, or whatever you want to call it. That's how I got through life. I got through SEAL training by burning as hot as I could. I got through life by being one step away from a fight all the time, right? That's how you deal with fear, right? I was afraid of heights. And so I'd have to go up in planes and get angry and to hide my shaking from fear and run out the back of the plane first. Right. That was my life prior to finding Jesus. I had a cancer scare, didn't come to Christ, but then, I considered myself an intellectual, for whatever that's worth, but I consider myself a scientist because I was educated in the Northeast, and my wife has a very similar testimony where you're never given a chance to believe in anything other than evolution and science, right? In schools, the indoctrination starts right away, and you are moved away from a creationist view to evolution, time, Big Bang, and all that, which I don't have a lot of problem with some of that. God could have used, but, again, I never was presented a counter case. And so during my time, like I remember going through Hell Week, and there were guys who, here you are, you're in SEAL training, Hell Week, you're miserable. And, I'm proud that I made it there, right? People are dropping like flies. And I went through with a broken leg, and I'm still there. And I'm watching guys, sit there and pray and thank God for them. And I would get so mad, right? Saying, no one's doing this but you guys. Like, I don't know why this, how naive and how vain was I to say that. But again, it's like a wounded animal. You thrash out at anything and everything. I always wanted there to be a God. I was just afraid he wasn't there. And if he was there, that he didn't love me enough to care about me, right? That's the key behind most of atheism when you look at it, right? They're all wounded. They're all, angry that there is no God, but but there is, So anyways, a book made its way into my life called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, by Frank Turek and Norman Geisler, I want to say, is the two authors of that. And that book, in the first third, took me from diehard atheist to agnostic, right? They gave me the counter logical case for creationism, right? The specificity argument, and how if anything was off by 1,000th of a percentile or this or that, we wouldn't be here, right? All these different things. And it started showing me design. Design has a designer, right? I saw a DNA and it was code, right? If DNA was 100% code, well, if there's code, there's a coder, right? That means that somebody had to write that code, which was God. So anyways, so within that first page of that, first third of that, I went from atheist to agnostic. The last 2/3 is the case for Christ, where they present, the evidence for Christ, how we can trust the Bible, how close it is to the original manuscript, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, well, hey, these guys are right about this. I'm going to give my life to Christ. So I gave my life to Christ, had a, felt this warm, like I'm lying in bed when I say the prayer, right? I'm like, okay, I'm here. This spooky moment where I'm going to give my life to God that I've been an enemy of my whole entire life. I was an enemy. I listened to the most evil. My favorite song when I wanted to bench 500 pounds was God Hates Us All by Slayer, which is about the darkest. That and all their other works were really hardcore. And, I had this feeling where the closest thing I could say is I've had not hypoxia, but can't remember the exact term, but it's when you hyperventilate and you build up CO2 in your system and your whole body tingles. Every fiber of your being tingles. It was like that, but warm, really warm. And I'm just lying in bed and I'm like, man, I'm dreaming this. This is weird. This isn't happening. My rational mind is coming in. And then I go to the gym the next morning and I'm putting on my playlist, which is one big middle finger to the sky is my playlist, right? And so I go on and I hit play and I'm like, I can't. I instantly was turned off by it, not by choice, right? So God stripped that from me immediately, right? He immediately convicted me of my music, which was part of my superpower, and he ripped my rage from me. So my primary fuel source was gone in an instant. Now, what am I going to run on? Right? Like I sat there for 15 minutes skipping through songs and I couldn't make it through any of them to even do my next set. So anyways, so now I'm saved. I go to an alpha class. I end up going to Boston, because while I was deployed as a SEAL, I lost my little brother to heroin and went to his funeral, and all of his friends were already dead from heroin. That's why they went to Park Street Church. And they had a pastor there named Gordon Hugenberger. And Gordon Hugenberger was this giant of the faith. Like, he is a borderline archaeologist. He's got all these different degrees, PhDs, complete opposite of me, right? But he, in his congregation, now Boston probably has more colleges per capita than anyone because it's a small city, but it's got a ton of colleges. You got MIT, Harvard, Boston College, Northeastern, Boston University. I'm just countless. Well, the Christians who were like the head of MIT physics was a congregant at Park Street Church, right? So there's a scientist incarnate. The head of the science department from Harvard was there at Park Street Church. So when Gordon got up there and he taught six-day creation, he couldn't be lazy, right? He had to get up there and present, here's a young earth argument, here's an old earth argument, here's this argument, here's that, and present it. Because if he just got up there and tried to jam something out there without all that, he would lose a lot of people, out there. So I loved his teaching style by saying, hey, this is what the Bible says. This is how different people have interpreted this. And it was just exactly what I needed at that point. But I was still a carnal Christian, diehard carnal Christian. Like, and my heart wasn't changed other than what God had ripped from me. I was still a liar and a cheater and all these other things. And, I just figured I had to clear my balance sheet of sins before I died. And then my son was born, Connor, who has autism. And autism, watching my son struggle took out my baby Christian legs, right? Totally knocked me over. So now I'm back to being angry that God's punishing me for being an atheist for all these years by torturing my son with autism. And I'm watching all this stuff and I got a bunch of woe is me stuff going on. And so we ended up leaving Boston and going to Charlottesville to slow things down. We had family, friends. The Virginia Institute of Autism was there to work on my son. Because when you're on the SWAT team, you don't have a life, right? So I get a job bodyguarding a guy worth $52 billion. And they fly me in, fly me out. So I can live anywhere I want. They fly me in, fly me out, treat me very well, and it's amazing. While I'm there in Boston, Sandy Hook happens. So that is, the active shooter where an autistic kid walked in and killed a bunch of first and second graders and teachers in Connecticut. So I leave my job and start my own company called Trident Shield, the emergency preparedness company. And I've been doing that for 13 years now. But during that time, I was running a gym that I started that was part of that business. And it was to train people to go off into the military, right? For people who want to be SEALs, all that stuff. And I started letting heroin addicts work out for free in the morning with the gym. And I'd pair them with a vet or I'd pair them with a cop to try to give them structure and mentoring. And one of my friends came up to me and he's a Christian. And he's like, hey, Jason, you really should go to this Operation Restored Warrior program. I'm like, what's that? He's like, oh, well, it's this retreat with a bunch of guys and they pray over you and all this stuff. And I'm like, I'll look at it. And I look at it and it's for suicidal people, for vets dealing with suicide. That's why I was starting. I'm like, Mike, what was his name? I'm like, I'm not suicidal, dude. I'm the most selfish guy I know. I want to wring every second out of life. I don't want to like cut it short, dude. And he's like, trust me, you need it. And I'm like, no, I'm not going. Well, eventually he convinces me to go because it's for the first time ever was at Lake Tahoe. And I promise when I get to heaven, I'm going to ask God, three things. I'm going to ask God, why Abraham, why Jacob, and why not Tahoe instead of Israel? You know, like if I'm like, why are those three questions I will ask him? And I could see everyone fighting over Tahoe, but Israel really isn't that nice of a place if you look at it. No offense, right? So anyways, I go there and I get radically healed. They identify my father wound, which I didn't know what to call it at that point. I get healing. I get introduced to a true masculine Jesus, not the beta.
All sorts of incredible details in
Footnotes
that.
were, yeah, a lot of footnote version there.
Sure, and certainly it's all due to to God's grace throughout all
100%.
of that.
100%.
But what I really want to hear more on is really what you kind of ended up there of the masculine Jesus, not the real effeminate. I always kind of termed it as hippie Jesus, free love and all of that fun stuff. What does that mean to you when you talk about a masculine Jesus, more of a masculine church? What do you mean by that?
So if I could frame that up a little bit. So after I got saved, right, I come back from ORW and now I'm going church shopping. And now here I am. I'm on fire for Christ. And I start going to these churches and I do like everyone else. I go to the place with the biggest band and the best pre-show, right? And I go and it's like a country concert or whatever. And I'm just like, all right, no depth, no substance. Pastor it doesn't have a callus on his hands, doesn't have a scar on his body, has been a professional student his entire life. Right. And I know guys at that point who are putting a gun in their mouth every night and trying not to figure out ways to pull the trigger. I know guys whose daughters are now strippers because they were deployed for all their teenage years. Right. I know guys who are battling porn and every other thing, and no one's talking about it. Like no one is addressing this from the podium. It's all about on-ramping, rainbow unicorn Jesus, right? Come on in, Jesus bro, but not Jesus Lord, right? Everyone wanted the savior, but nobody wanted the boss, right? Jesus is our boss, right? So anyways, I shop around for a while, and then finally I get exposed to a guy named Ken Graves up in Bangor, Maine. And Ken Graves is a Calvary Chapel pastor who it was a lumberjack, so he wasn't a veteran or he wasn't some dude with combat experience, but he grew up at 16 in a prison ministry, helping, he wasn't in prison. He ran away because he thought, the rapture was coming tomorrow and to serve God. And then has been in the church ever since, went out, joined the hippie Jesus movement, all that stuff, but came back and started doing man's work. He's a lumberjack by trade, and he's got a voice like Thor, right? Like two mountains grinding. And he's masculinity, incarnate if you're a dude, right? He's the first pastor I ever looked at and I'm like, I want to be like that guy, right? You know what I'm saying? Like he wasn't there in a sweater vest. He wasn't there in a bow tie. He was there in flannel and he was real and he was talking about real things and real challenges and he was walking it out. Like most of the pastors I knew, their families were catastrophes. Right, they have pastor syndrome, which is I'm going to pour in everyone else and leave my family starving, and so they throw prodigals everywhere. Right, Ken didn't have any of that. Ken was the dad to his own family, the dad to everyone else. When the cops had a problem kid that they found, they brought it to Ken's house, and Ken would take him in. And Ken, so then he has this 1-year resident discipleship program with guys and gals living separately, and they learn. He teaches them how to live. Right? So he's basically discipling them just like Christ did every day through hard work, getting in the Bible, and he fathers them, right? Which is what all of us are missing. The church is feminized now is because we don't have a father. We've gone off and embraced everything feminine, and we've made the church more feminine instead of embracing what it should be, which is we are called to be the good shepherd, right? What does the shepherd do? right? Jesus had a mission. He was the lamb when he came back, right? He was there to die. If he did not die, it would have been another failure of a mission and we'd all be doomed. So he came to die, okay? We are called to be good shepherds, to embrace that aspect of Jesus Christ, which is to be a good shepherd. Now, shepherd, what does what? Loves his flock, nurtures his flock, protects his flock, trains up his flock, right? So he has to protect them from the wolves, from the lions, and from other people stealing from them. And Jesus, the Bible is so amazing. Like, it's so amazing. But think of all the stuff that's not in the Bible. These guys were on the road with Jesus for 3 years, where they walked everywhere, chopped firewood, slept spooning because it was cold outside, right? They did hard stuff together, hard masculine stuff together. And men, thank you, men need to be challenged. And here's what I've learned about men. If men aren't leading, they're coasting. And if they're coasting, you have a blob of a man who has checked out and the wife ends up leading. That's a lot there. Sorry. I don't know if I answered your question or not, but
I think it gets into just more good content there of we're seeing this obviously in the church and just the culture at large that, when you don't have true masculine leadership, headship, everything else goes away. My pastor said something, this has been a while back in a discipleship group that we were doing, that the man is the head of the home, not should be the head of the home, not might be, but is. And that extends to whether you leave the home or not. Like, you're still the head. And when it's fatherless, we know all the bad things that happen. And he actually gave an interesting statistic. I'm not entirely sure where it came from, but it was looking at families where, let's say, there's a dad that just ups and leads the family, just leaves them, coward way out, and just has nothing to do with them. That's a different category than, say, a family, talking about military servicemen, say maybe somebody dies in Iraq or something like that. But they are a caring, loving husband. Those kids end up differently, even though both of them still don't physically have a dad in that moment.
Right.
One has left and the other is dead. That dad is still the head of the family, even though he's passed on. He sent all the letters from Iraq or wherever he was at, and was just intimately in their lives, even if he physically wasn't there. And even if his body's gone, he's still the head. Whereas that person that just upped and left them, he's still the head.
Yeah.
He's just not
there. I can
there.
explain that if you want to.
I would love to.
So the one who went to Iraq did what God commanded us to do. He paid the highest sacrifice, giving his life for those he loved, right? To lay down his life for his friends, but not only for his friends, but people who hated him and people who loved him. So he set the standard, an incredibly high standard of God's standard, which is exactly what Christ did, versus the one who got up and left, abandoned. That's abandonment, right? There is nothing to lead there. There's nothing to follow there, right? That's complete and utter betrayal, right? So the one who went off to defend noble, high attainment, walking out God's mission, right? The other one, not so much. And part of the reason why we're in this trouble is because the heresy of pacifism that has invaded the church, where people think turn the other cheek means that Christ did that because Christ was going to be sacrificed. And that was why he did that. He told us, right, after he said, while you were with me, while I was with you, you didn't need money, you didn't need a weapon, you didn't need anything, right? And if they wouldn't receive you, shake off the dust from your sandals. Well, he said, now I'm leaving. So now you need to have all these things. And if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. All right. Now, here is God himself telling you it's better to be cold and miserable than to be unarmed in that moment, right? And people are like, oh, Jay, you're okay. Who is the most celebrated two people, arguably, in the New Testament? The centurion, who Christ marveled at his faith, right? God himself marveled at a blood-soaked centurion's faith, okay? So there's one, okay? Two, who did God have a heart after? a man after his own heart. David, who is what? A warrior. Okay. So there's another one we'll go about. Next, when Christ and God decided to open up the books to the Gentiles, who was the first person he saved? Did he save a theologian? No. Did he save a farmer? No. Did he save a doctor? No. Did he save a nurse? No. No, he chose a blood-soaked centurion named Cornelius, right? From the Italian cohort, special forces centurion, right? So on top of you have all that, right? And why is that? It's because no one understands time and sacrifice like the soldier. The soldier and the people who risk their lives for a living understand time and what they're sacrificing far more than the person who never sees death or encounters death. You know, that's why you see not only veterans committing suicide or being distraught and crushed. You see EMTs and firefighters and cops, right? And this thing that's happening now with EMT, you can only see so many people dressed up going to Christmas dinner in a car accident with their baby mangled in the back seat. Like they see that all day, every day. People, like when you go to war, you expect people to die, right? So there's only a couple people who expect to die, the possibility of dying when they go out. One is gangbangers because they're in a war in their own ground, right? So anytime as a cop, because I was a SWAT cop, you encounter people and it's like, man, I never thought it was going to happen to me, this and that. Well, soldiers expect that to happen because they're in a war and they know it can happen at any time. And they understand the fragility of life. So when they step onto the battlefield, when they step in front of others to protect others, they are literally walking out the highest, thing that Jesus said, no greater love than this. Right now, you take all the beta males, you take all the people who talk for a living, you do all, and they'll never know that. They'll never walk that life out. Right? Your average soldier, average grunt, average person who may know Jesus and may have read the Bible once and is trying to do it as good has already done more, has walked a more Christ-like life than the permanent students ever will. And that is why when we started paying, pastors these exorbitant salaries where they become permanent students and they're accountable to pleasing the audience and they don't want to talk on this because they're going to offend, we don't want to talk about abortion. We'll split this right down there. And all my big donors are Democrats. So if I say that over here, they're going to stop doing this, or they're all are pro-life or just pick something else or another topic, right? Or I'm not going to talk about sex outside of marriage because, I'm going to scare away all the young kids that are coming here, right? And you become a slave to their pleasure instead of being a prophet dropping truth bombs, which is...
Absolutely. God is truth.
I wasn't sure how you were going to act to that.
No, God is truth. And we need to celebrate and preach truth, whether that offends people, which it will. It's not a if. It will offend people, and we need to do that regardless of, who's paying tithes or offerings or whatever. God's truth is above all of that. And I guess kind of last question that I have for you, for just the audience, that whether they're male or female, but particularly for the men, that you know what, Jason, you're right. I feel out of place at church. It does seem too feminine. That masculinity is really looked down upon at church. What's your advice for them? Should they just find a different church? Should they start their own? What's your advice for somebody in that position?
Yes. And, but not everyone can do that, right? So home churches are what church was being in concerts, all that. You look at Acts, you look at the first century church, it was not what we have today, right? It was not all these. I understand the want to do that, but there comes a lot of complications on this. Now, Francis Chan, who I agree with a lot, but I also disagree with a lot, right? Anybody who's a San Francisco guy, I'm probably going to disagree with a lot on a lot of social issues, but I can't disagree with how much that guy loves the Lord, right? He literally walked away from a mega church because, one day he heard his name being mentioned more than Christ's name and was completely destroyed by that. Like convicted and said, okay, this has become the church of Francis Chan and not the Church of Jesus Christ. And he crushed it and went away and started home churches, right? A home church network. I think that's great. But the other thing you can do is you can stay in those churches and you can try to be the change. The thing that I hate is how people bail on churches every
Mm,
time it's not the way they want. So you got to ask yourself, can I be the force for change to make my church better? And if you try that and you can't, then you can move on, right? But you at least got to try, right? So what I tell every man and what I tell every woman to do is if you want to walk this way, the Christian warrior way, right? Is one, you need a mentor, you need a discipler, you need to find someone who you look up to, who you want to be, right? We all want to be Christ, but there are certain people who are further along,
mm,
right? Like the Apostle Paul, right? Again, everyone saw Paul, and except for the people who hated him, which was a lot of people, right? Because Paul was walking it out, man. And Paul was the first one who was really being persecuted and punished and suffered and all these things because Christ said he would. Why? Because he persecuted the church, right? And that was the Gentiles apostle, right? That was their guy, right? The most, the most the literal Pharisee of them all, right? So, again, so finding someone who is walking it out in their life. They may not be the best speaker, they may not be what it, but if they're living it out, you got something to learn from them, right?
mm.
And I love home churches. This is a glorified home church. I've converted this my 2-car garage into a church. We open up the 2-car garage doors and we can seat all the way down the driveway, and do that. We also have a mountain in the back of our yard. I call it a mountain with 360-degree views where we do outdoor church when the weather's nice and all that stuff. Because I'm in Northeast Tennessee where the weather's great. Um, but anyway, so they can do that. But the other thing they need to do is they need to get what I call a war council. And a war council is a bunch of people around you who they know all your weaknesses and you know all their weaknesses, right? So literally, it's you guys know each other's dirt. So it's mutually assured destruction if anyone betrays one another, right? But that's so when you go into battle, which is just life today, right? Let's say you got a heart for Christ, you're wearing a shirt with a cross on it, and let's say you have a history of womanizing in your past, right? And there's a very beautiful waitress there who sees your shirt, starts talking to you, wants to talk to you about Christ, and wants to give you her number so that you can do that. You have your blinders on and be like, sure, I'm going to help this girl to Christ. Your friend will be like, nope, let's give that to your wife. Let's connect her with your wife, right? That's just to make sure. Now, I should do that, right? But even you can't say what I was doing was wicked, right, in itself. But that's to make sure that you got buddies around to make sure you don't take the off ramp by accident, right? When your buddies who understand you and they know your norm, and all of a sudden you come up in the first sentence, you've already got 4 cuss words. It's like, whoa, bro, what is going on? Like you've already, you're bleeding from somewhere. Where you shot? Like what's going on in your life? And my job as your buddy and as your work counselor was to figure out where you're bleeding and to stop it, right? To plug the hole. So those are some things that you can do. The other thing that you got to really do is you got to become dangerous. And Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot. That the 1826 dictionary, Webster's dictionary, something like that, is the dictionary I go to when I want a definition of something. It refers to the Bible in almost every one of its definitions. Since then, it's gone woke. And one of the things they've changed is meekness, right? So if you were to describe Christ as something, you'd probably say he was meek. Well, in today's thing, the second or third line, definition for it is weak or deficient in spirit. I'm sorry, but that's like the opposite of what Christ was. Christ could have killed everyone with a word. He endured suffering, punishment, mocking as God in the flesh without sinning, meaning that he didn't have a wicked, angry, sinful thought. Like that is so much discipline that it breaks your mind when you start thinking about it. Anybody who's been through any type of interrogation training, anyone who's ever had them, you think horrible things about the people who are doing this to you, not Christ, right? So he is power constrained, and that's what we all need to be, the sheath sword. We know how to use it, but we only use it for justice and to protect them.
I think those are all fantastic points there, and it something that's really important, and I've been beating this drum consistently, especially post COVID in the church, that you can't do Christianity alone. It's not an
No.
option. It's not something that you can say, "Oh, well, I'll just do this a little bit. Maybe I'll go to church every once in a while, but it's just me and God." No, that's not an option. That's not the way the church is made. We have to have that discipleship. So I love the way that you parse that out there, because yeah, it's a biblical command that we have to be with others and then in discipleship with others. No doubt about it.
Yeah, and we're part of a body. If I cut this finger off and I lock it in a closet somewhere, it's gonna rot and die. Right? That's where the enemy wants you, isolated, alone, separated. You got to reconnect it to the body, and that's what we need to do. And so, because of YouTube and all these other things are great. Online services are great because you get connections and the ability to take in as much as you want of teachers all around the world. But you need to be in a local body. Period.
Yes. Yes. End of discussion. No doubt about it. Well, Jason, there's all sorts of great topics that we've gotten into. I would love for you to be able to share just a little bit of how the audience can be in touch with you after the show.
Yeah, sure. There's a couple. You can find me at christianwarriormission.org. And the best platform where I don't get hammered with censorship is Twitter. I'm Pastor Seal Cop. Pastor Seal Cop, like you see down there. Follow me on Twitter. I do a fellowship show Monday through Thursday from 9 to 10 p.m. It starts with 3 battles. We fight a battle to get a humble and grateful heart aligned onto the Lord. We do a battle to pursue our relationship with our Creator, and we do that through prayer and studying a chapter a night. And then the third battle is making time for fellowship with iron sharpening iron. We do fellowship and I interact with the audience. So again, we're isolated alone, and some people are more alone than others, and some people are in places where they don't. We're not meant to fit in with this world. All right, we're not meant to. We're always going to feel like outsiders. So this is a great way to do it. And what I hope is that people will grab more people, so they're not. So maybe watching our show or my Sunday service, which is at 11. Same thing. And again, I stream it to all platforms, but Twitter is where they don't hammer me. So I'd love to see you on there. I'd love to talk to you. I'd love to pray for you, any of those things. And I really appreciate being on your show, Johnny.
Absolutely. Well, I'll have all of that linked down in the show notes below. So definitely go and check that out. And Jason, thanks again for being on.
God bless you, brother.
Absolutely. And thank you to everybody that tuned into this episode, and we'll catch you on the next one.